Good afternoon, good morning, depending where you are. Welcome once again to our monthly webinar series. Today we will be discussing the SMEs and trade competitiveness and the standardization. The main topic is fostering the SMEs trade competitiveness through standardization, helping SMEs to be an engine of trade, growth, and employment under the AfCFTA and the role of standardization. I am Dr. Sengimana Emogen, the Secretary General of African Organization for Standardization, and I will be your moderator today. When you look at the influence of the SME in the global trade, we are talking about 95% of the SMEs of the business in the whole global market. That's when you look at the European Union level, where actually the SMEs constitute 99.8%. You look at the America, it's around 99%. You look at in Africa also around 90% of the whole business, and that's employ around 60% all over the world. That's employment. It shows how important the SMEs are. Sometimes we ask ourselves on the African continent, when we talk about SMEs, we think that we have a particular issues on productivity, issues on the compliance to the standard, but it's all over. Today we have speakers starting from UNIDO, that is a well-known UN agency on industrialization. We have speakers from private sector, from COMESA, and we have speakers who will talk and link on the standardization work either in Europe or in Africa, especially for African Organization for Standardization. The data that we have, what we are looking today is to see how can we make SMEs competitive, how they can compete, how they can connect to the market through different linkages with customers, with businesses, with different institutions, and how the change actually in the business, financing requirements, skills requirements, and issues of innovation. But when you look at the standardization is what we call the 3 C's. They compete, the first C, they conform, which is second C, and connect to the market. Mainly the standardization helping on competing and conform to the requirement of technical regulation and other market requirement, then helps you to connect to the market. We will be listening to our speakers. The main objective being to give a platform to all of us to see how the SMEs development in Africa can be harnessed through standardization and productivity policies, especially for sustainable development and linking to the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Our first speaker is Ebe Muschaili, who is industrial development expert in the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. She has worked on it, and she has experience of actually more than 13 years in the area of quality infrastructure and working with the SMEs. She knows Africa. She has experience, she has worked in Morocco, she has experience in Senegal, Burkina Faso, Tunisia, Benin. She has really worked with developing countries. She will be speaking to us on SMEs as engines of sustainable development and growth, why SMEs matter for Africa's growth and transformation agenda and the opportunities within the AfCFTA agreement. Ebe Muschiari, the floor is yours. Thank you. You can share your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Secretary General, for the introduction and for having UNIDO and specifically the WACOMP Ghana, the West Africa Competitiveness Program, in this important webinar. So without further delaying, I will guide you through this experience that UNIDO is doing, and that is really focused on how to strengthen the competitiveness of SMEs for better accessing the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So I believe it's really the good presentation for today's webinar. So WACOMP is a partnership initiative between the European Community and the ECOWAS. And it's a program that is funded in covering several countries through a 116 million contribution by the EU. And in Ghana, we started implementing the project in 2019. So we are a little bit midway on our project implementation, and that's why we can today present some of the results of the work that we've done. And just to give you an idea, these are the countries where WACOMP is implemented, and where you see the small asterisk or the small star is where UNIDO is the lead implementing agency. And today I will be focusing on Ghana only. The approach, and I really like the fact that you introduced the seminar by talking about compete, conform, and connect, because we base our intervention in this, and we actually upgraded or expanded a little bit the three competitiveness component by adding two more. The program in Ghana focuses on three selected value chains, which are fruits, specifically mango and pineapple, cassava and its derivatives, and the cosmetic and personal care products, with a focus mainly on shea-based products in Ghana. And what we use to implement the project is this, what we call the 5 C's for competitiveness, which include the 3 C's mentioned by the Dr. Secretary General, plus 2 more C's, which are the coordinate and the credit, which also represent a very important aspects of for SMEs that want to be competitive on the international market. So the first one, the first C is the coordination. It's the promotion of a dialogue within the value chains between the public and the private sectors to set the way for the value chains towards competitiveness. The second C is the compete, which is strengthening the competitiveness and the upgrading of SMEs. And what we do within UNIDO is essentially to support the setup of clusters and networks within the value chains. The conform component, well, Arso knows this extremely well, is the support provided to the quality infrastructure so that SMEs can really comply with the market requirements, be it national, regional, or international. The connect component, which is the promotion of the connectivity with the market. So knowing where we are selling and knowing how to sell. And the last, but extremely relevant for SMEs, is the link to financial institutions and to appropriate financial schemes that can support them in their effort to access new markets. Now, this is the theory, and how do we apply this theory to a concrete example? And I will try to show you how these 5 C's for competitiveness are applied in Ghana in the cassava sector. And I thought of focusing on cassava because it's probably one of the value chains that is present throughout Africa and that could be easily understood. On the coordinate part, what we have been doing with the Ministry of Industry over the past 2 years is really to engage with the stakeholders, both private sector and public sector, to develop a comprehensive cassava sector strategy. A cassava strategy that can address all the bottlenecks in the value chain, and then support also the stakeholders to develop a roadmap for medium and long-term investments that are needed in the value chain. And then, of course, identify which are the roles and the responsibilities of each of these partners. And we work in very close cooperation with the Ministry of Industry, with the Ministry of Agriculture, and also with partners representing the private sector, for example, the Ghana Industrial Cassava Stakeholder Platform. Under the compete component, the main focus is on strengthening clusters, where clusters are regional concentrations of actors present in a specified region and value chain. So we work with producers to support cluster members in good agricultural practices for the farmers, but also in good manufacturing practices for the processors. We work and support their efforts to link with each other so that producers and processors can work towards a final product that can be better sold. And there we intervene in terms of productivity, product quality, certifications, and so on and so forth. And we try to set up these linkages that can become sustainable through the intervention of the different associations on the ground. Under the conform component, there is a triple level of intervention. The first one is to define standards. So support the definition or the revision of standards at the national level that can influence the good quality of products issued by the value chain. And for this, we worked in very close cooperation with the Ghana Standards Authority to develop the cassava starch standard and the cassava ethanol standards so that these products are upgraded. We also intervene in supporting the laboratories, because once the producer produces a quality product, we need laboratories that can test this product, and we support by purchasing and installing equipments, but also by lots of trainings and method validations. And then, last but not least, we work at the companies and at the processor level for them to implement these good manufacturing practices and standards. For the Connect component, we have been supporting the Ghana Export Promotion Authority and the other partners to develop a comprehensive marketing plan for the sector export marketing plan for the cassava sector in Ghana through a lot of discussions among partners and considering the opportunities and challenges that the value chain has comparatively with the other countries in the region. And then I was mentioning at the very beginning, credit remains for the SMEs a very strategic intervention. So we organize and support trainings for producers and processors on financial issues, on budgeting, on product pricing, which are all elements that are very critical for being competitive at the SMA level. this is an example of how this materialized on the ground in a very specific cluster at the Abura level in the eastern part of the country, where through the provision of these inputs, which were technical guidance for the cluster members to work together, lots of training on good agricultural practices and good manufacturing practices, and then through strengthening these linkages between producers and processors, we managed to make the cluster more competitive and to enhance the quality of the products issued by the cluster, and to let's say substitute the import from other region of the raw material, and also to create a bit more ambition by the cluster members that now have a strategic plan to market their products. To maybe close and to see what was interesting in this case, but also in other cases like the mango cluster in the Odowa or the shea cluster in the northern area, how these SMEs that are part of this cluster can really increase their participation into the African Continental Free Trade Agreement market. Quality is essential, so enhanced product quality is definitely the focus of our intervention, and knowing what the market is requiring and is requesting is essential. So standards should be disseminated largely, and awareness should be raised among the producers. There has been a shift with COVID on e-marketing and e-commerce, and this will continue. So this is also something where SMEs in the area should focus more and more and learn new competencies and be more innovative in promoting their products. Packaging and logistics are definitely an integral part of the game. So an investment should be done also in how you present the product and how you make sure that you can reach the other countries within the continental free trade area. And then for us, what is extremely important is not to work in isolation. I mean, small and medium enterprises that do not collaborate cannot be competitive in such a huge market, and they need to collaborate through networks and clusters in order to be able to access new opportunities. And there are many new opportunities thanks to the agreement signed in the area. And with this, I would like to conclude. And if ever you are curious to know more about the project, then you can visit our website, and you can find there many more videos, interviews with our partners, and get to know us a bit better. And with this, I conclude, and I thank you for your attention. And thank you very much, Dr. Secretary General. Over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Ebe. When I like the two other C's, the coordinate and the credit, which is very crucial for our SMEs. I especially credit because the financing for SMEs have been a big issue, actually. Even the financing of the other three C's to conform to the standards, to the technical regulation, even to value addition into those value chain we are talking about. I am curious to know if you feel that this project is sustainable and can really impact on the intra-ECOWAS trade on this value chain that you are working on. Do you think it will really increase the intra-ECOWAS trade on cassava issues or on cosmetic product, but especially on cassava, because I know the whole continent is now interested on the cassava value chain?
Yeah, definitely. And your question is well heard. Also, we are in the middle of the implementation, and we are currently also going through a midterm evaluation. And this is one of the questions that is always raised. No, what you're doing is really impacting and having a sustainable change in the intra-Africa trade for cassava, and I believe so. I believe we are really intervening where there is a need in terms of enhancing the quality of the product, in terms of enhancing and proposing a better offer for the country, thanks to this clustering and networking. And we are also working in close cooperation with the other WACOMP in the area. And UNIDO is also working, for example, in Sierra Leone. And we are also working with the ECOWAS Regional Commission for cassava standards in general. So I believe, yes, the focus on such an important value chain is extremely important, and the results are there to stay, hopefully. And I believe in few years we can also have some more data on how this has impacted the trade in the area.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Ebe. We will come back to you in a short while in the other discussion that we will be having. Our next presenter, who is also well-known helping the SMEs, Mrs. Sandra Wera. She's the Chief Executive Officer and the COMESA Business Council. Actually, she also has her own business, AimWell Project. If you follow her on different social media, you can see what she's doing. Wera is very passionate in women empowerment and has driven many projects and programs on gender inclusion with mainly digital financing services space. Wera will be talking to us about the challenges and the strategy for SMEs in Africa with high experience as a private sector leading CEO in the COMESA region. Sandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for that eloquent presentation. If you
can share your presentation. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, it's a pleasure to be here in this particular forum. Dr. Hemogen, thank you for inviting me. I will not go into aspects of my introduction since it has already been done so eloquently, but I'd like to speak on behalf of the COMESA Business Council on some of the challenges that micro, small, and medium enterprises are facing in terms of business operations, growing into growth-oriented sustainable enterprises, and also talking about some of the standardization challenges, and SPS issues that they are facing across our markets. This is a snapshot of a company that we had engaged with in Malawi during one of our projects that assist in facilitating SMEs to meet standard requirements that help them to integrate into supply chains of corporate companies in Africa and also internationally. You can see that one of his calls as he was expanding his business into regional markets he was actually requesting for more support services to help him meet the HACCP, the health and safety, the hazard analysis and critical control points, standard requirements that help him to export to larger markets. So there's a growing need from the industry to actually do so. Otherwise, we find that a lot of our SME markets operate in critical small domestic market shares, yet there's a huge potential for them to grow and expand into international markets and become very strong, competitive, sustainable players. So the COMESA Business Council, we represent the private sector interest in 21 countries. We work across 34 business sectors, and we provide very core services in business policy and advocacy, membership development, and business facilitation services. Our board of directors comes from the presidents of industries, captains of industries of the private sector associations within 9 member states. And we also have the COMESA Secretary General, who sits as an ex officio to the board. It's important to understand that the COMESA Business Council has a very unique competitive advantage. We are able to participate as a policy institution in platforms of policy formulation and decision-making across all the formulation processes in COMESA. This has given us a keen advantage to directly influence policy engagements and policy discussions in the direction of the interests of the private sector. We've done a lot of work on SMEs in COMESA. Some of the aspects that we have focused on is how we can define micro, small, and medium enterprises. And our observations have focused us on looking at them from an employee perspective. So you can see some of the statistics there that show that micro SMEs could have 2 to 9 employees. Small enterprises would have 10 to 50 employees, and medium enterprises would have 51 to 150 SMEs. It's important to know that annual turnover ranges from about $25,000 to $50,000 annually. So the SME space within Africa cannot be compared to the SME space in the Western economies. And that's very, very important to also note as we talk about the issues of standards and the capacities and the capabilities for SMEs to comply to these standards. It's also important to note that over 90% of the businesses in Africa are driven by micro, small, and medium enterprises, and they are the largest employers in our markets. There's a growing narrative to strengthen productive capacity, especially in the manufacturing sector within our industries. I'm also happy to say, as a champion for women, that we are seeing that traditionally male-led manufacturing sectors are increasingly opening up their markets to involve women SMEs to participate in their supply chains, in their value chains. And this has also strengthened a lot of inclusion within this particular space. Statistics have showed that manufacturing goods account for only 13% of African trade. And it's important to note that we import the rest from Africa. Some of the key challenges we have noted is, of course, the issue of standard compliance and issues of purchasing requirements, meeting purchasing requirements of the larger corporate companies in our markets. Just to touch base on the issue of COVID, I just thought it's important to raise to this platform and to ARSO management that we've noted that over a quarter of SMEs have been unable to continue operating during the pandemic. They have been very resilient, but we have seen that most SMEs have seen their businesses fall within 15 to 18 months since the COVID-19 pandemic, and they're suffering huge losses. So there's also a need to take this into consideration as we discuss in the issue of standards, SPS compliance, and the business culture of industries today post the pandemic. So this is our problem tree on local sourcing for SMEs. Local sourcing is directly tied to the issues of SPS and standards requirements in the region. And of course, you will note from down here that one of the biggest challenges for micro, small, and medium enterprises is that they don't meet international standard requirements. And this is also, of course, because of a lack of information and understanding about the nature or the purchasing requirements of our markets and the needs that corporate companies, regional and internationally, put in place to ensure that the product they give to the customer is at its best. So because of that, you find a lot of multinational companies in our markets have failed to have trust. They don't have a confidence in actually partnering with SMEs within our regional markets. So purchasing requirements and standard requirements is very important. Of course, there's also the issue of poor logistics and supplies within our market. It has really hampered SMEs trading across the border. There's also limited information, credible information on partnerships to be made, whether you're trying to engage in partnership at a distribution channel level, at a production level, or at a local supplier level. That information is not provided freely within the SME market. And of course, because of that, we see a lot of local sourcing partnerships between SMEs hampered because of these unstable processes And we see corporate companies signing long-term contracts with international businesses that are able to meet consistently and at a cost-effective level, and also with adequate quality control, they're able to meet the requirements of the companies in our market. So as a result of that, you find that there's a low participation of SMEs trading across the region. And we've also seen that a lot of SMEs remain as local performers operating within domestic markets. And as a result of that, that is where you see our interregional trade remains low, the growth of SMEs is hampered, and there's no strong economic development, and formal job creation. So it's important to realize the cause and the effect of industry performance within our market. It's also important to note that that problem tree I showed there is directly tied to standards, compliance, and SMEs. Standards and certifications are very important because they signal producer reliability, credibility, affordability, and consistency in the market. It's also important to note that standards and certifications help small firms, SMEs, small businesses, to connect and compete in international markets. It also helps them to integrate into value chains, into supply chains of larger companies. It also helps them to think about diversifying, maybe moving into different markets, moving into a horizontal aspect, and working in collaborative mechanisms that help them to share resources as they move into different markets. So that's a very strong link between why SPS and standard issues, why standardization is important. So some of the key challenges we have seen within the SMEs is that the industry has seen a lot of inconsistency in the business framework, on how to boost manufacturing competitiveness, especially with the aspects of standards. Government regulations keep on changing as time goes by, especially now with the post-COVID, when we're living in COVID-19. And this has stretched SMEs and business operations as they try to adjust to the different costs that are coming into the market. It's also important to note that within our African market, within COMESA, we have seen a lot of differences in food standards and regulations, and this hampers the development of industries to move into regional markets. So market access requirements have been very stringent, and as a result, we've seen that the cost of compliance has also gone up exponentially, and a lot of these SMEs are not even able to afford going through standard conformity assessments or even meeting the standard requirements of some of the businesses that they want to partner with. It's important that government looks at how to translate these high costs into something that can be more adequate for industry. So one of the key challenges is the multiple regulations, the cost of compliance, and the varying cost compliance requirements for businesses. I also want to highlight that we, of course, as industry, we as business recognize how essential standards are to international trade and value chains. We've noted that navigating this standards maze is not very easy. Key examples on the ground is we have talked a lot of SMEs who are still struggling to meet the most basic HACCP standard requirements. And now as we see certain markets put in the GFSI, and the like, you see a lot of businesses struggling to meet those requirements, and it's a huge cost to their industries. This definitely disrupts the business ecosystem that in this particular case in Africa is relatively young as it tries to move into regional markets. So we've received a lot of reports from African enterprises on the compliance to standards. Some of these reports have been focusing on the processes of obtaining certifications, which includes product testing, labeling, and other requirements, the lack of regional testing and control facilities that are shared across the region, the relevant infrastructure and trained personnel that can actually assist these SMEs with audits and counseling services, and of course the unusually high payments of certifications that I continuously mention in my presentation. So some of the key recommendations we have put forward is that, number one, it's important for governments to look at the tax policies that are hindrance to regional sourcing, those direct tax policies. It's very important that these tax policies consider the domestic and regional considerations that are promoting competitiveness. And it's also important that they are cascaded across various value chain levels in order to respond to the needs and the requirements of SMEs. And I believe a lot of studies on regional and international best practices that can help us to adjust our tax base to support infant industries that are growing within our markets. This is my last slide on the recommendations that we have to support standards and quality compliance for enterprises. I would like to appeal to ARSO and the stakeholders of ARSO to put in place public and private sector certification programs that are affordable and also are tailored to the needs and the business culture and regional markets of SMEs. It's important to really look at how we're operating as cottage industries, as small industries that are outsourcing services from our different partners, and see how we can actually have these programs set up for us. On the cost of certification, we are lobbying right now. We're advocating to member states to work with the bureaus of standards to support SME compliance with minimum standards, and also to reduce the cost of certifications for our SMEs. Lastly, I think it's very important to also promote a mindset within African industries on the culture of compliance and quality control. In many cases, you find a lot of enterprises focus more on dealing with their overheads and business operations as opposed to standards compliance. And it's time for us to try and adjust that narrative to ensure that we can focus on those particular instances. And I'm sure all of you have talked to SMEs who say, oh my gosh, standards compliance is too expensive. I can't afford HACCP, so I'm just going to focus on this small market and focus on my business operations to keep my industry alive. But sustainability is tied with standards. So it's important for us to look at that particular aspect. For COMESA region, it's important for us to also look at trade facilitation standards and regulations and to ensure that they're harmonized with international standards across our region. And I believe there's a lot of work going with ARSO on this particular aspect. On the lack of harmonization and non-equivalence, we are urging member states to develop and adopt harmonized COMESA food standards with a keen focus on horizontal regulations rather than vertical standards, so we can foster innovation in this sector. And of course, as we've always been advocating as a CBC, we are urging COMESA region to adopt a system of mutual recognition of quality assurance and certification systems among member states. These are our contacts. You're welcome to visit the COMESA Business Council on our social media pages. And I thank you very much for this presentation. I look forward to any comments and questions from the platform. Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for a very good presentation. Actually, a very impactful project you had on local sourcing. I have one question, a challenging one, because when you look at where we started, 95% of SME, all products related on the global market, meaning if they are exporting at a level of 50% on what we find in our different countries, there are SMEs who are managing to comply with this international regulation and complying with international standards. And we still have also the issue of the costs of certification, as you said. But we still also have studies that are showing that when you implement a standard, you gain more money. Actually, you increase in your business. We still have the challenge that SMEs are telling us implementation of standard is costly, while standardization bodies are saying, okay, it's costly, but it brings you money. What do you think the standardization bodies, the standardization sector, what do you think we are doing wrong? Yeah, for the private sector to take up the standards and they implement them.
Yes, it's very, very important to understand, and that's why I said it's important for the standards bodies to look at the business culture of SMEs, growing enterprises in our markets. And when you take a lens, when you wear a lens, look at it from that angle, you'd be able to understand why they can't meet the costs of standards, of certification. Number one, like I said, the small and growth enterprises in our markets are having an annual turnover of about 25 to 50,000, depending on the size of the market. And here I mean geographically, depending on a big country or a small country. That's one. Some of them have 10 to 15 or employees, but not all those employees are permanent employees, right? Some of them operating in their backyard. Really, in Africa, a lot of industries that start as cottage industries. They set up shop in their backyard, and as profits start to come in, probably after 15 months of operations, then they move out of the cottage industry environment and set up a small shop and the like. So from a businessman's perspective, he's still trying to meet his overhead costs, and he's looking at his return of investments. Standards conformity is something he's looking at as a long-term, a mid to long-term objective. And that's where the bureaus of standards have to come in and raise awareness that actually compliance starts from the very beginning. As soon as you're making a product, you're looking to sell it to the market, you need to set up the investment requirements there. And I think a lot of work has been done with this right now, especially on a private to private perspective, because I know a lot of retail chains, manufacturing bases, agro-industry bases have actually put out those purchasing requirements. There's a clear checklist. If you want to be a partner, if you want to join a supply chain, we expect A, B, C, D. And then you have a procurement officer or an auditor going to your farm to look to see if you're actually complying with those requirements before you start selling to this business. So you find that there's a lot of private to private engagement in this particular aspect. Unfortunately, there's a small group of companies, small group of SMEs who are able to meet those standard requirements, of the buying market in Africa. And that's where I liked what Unido said earlier, the principle of clustering, putting together, like industries in the same pool to share resources so they can actually meet general standard requirements is very, very important. And this is something that needs to be cultivated and built from a government perspective. There needs to be this modeling that helps industries to come together, to cluster as cooperatives, to look at shared costs that can also give them shared returns over time. So the standards bodies, you do come in from an aspect of like, yes, we can provide you with the certification methodologies, we can help you, we'll audit you, we'll give you counseling, but it costs this much. But it would be good for the standards bodies to scale that, to cascade the costs in terms while looking at the businesses that they're talking to. Hence the reason why we're also advocating for more affordable certification programs for SMEs, because the cultures are very different. And Dr. Imogen, I would like to emphasize that it's very important about this because we are not international SMEs. We are smaller and we are very different from different markets in Africa, from all the 55 countries. So it's important that there should be tailored solutions on the certification programs for SMEs, depending on the markets that we're operating in. Yes, thank you. I hope I've adequately responded to your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. As we say in French, in short, you said l'appétit vient manger. It means that we should start involving SME, be involved in the SME business at early stage, then they can understand very much what is going on and the benefits of standardization. And clustering, as you said, the same way as Unido said. Thank you very much for your insights in this topic. Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor.
Our next speaker is Maitane Labaria. She has a lot of experience in helping the SMEs. She has been working with the European Committee for Standardization, especially now she's appointed as a director for small business standard. She will be talking to us on standard SMEs toolkit in Africa, enabling SMEs awareness, participation, and uptake of standard, a European perspective. I hope that we will learn more actually how we can do it also on our continent. Maitane Labaria, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Dan, you can share her presentation, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much also to Arso for the invitation to this webinar. It is really a pleasure for me to be able to bring to the discussion the perspective of European SMEs. Europe is not Africa, but as it was mentioned before, and for what I have heard, some of the challenges are quite similar as well. So I hope the experience can also bring some added value and some ideas as well in this webinar and in the discussion. So if you go to the next slide, please, I would like to start by giving Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. I would just like to start by saying a few words about my organization, Small Business Standards. Just to clarify, this is an organization that is independent to the European Standards Organization. So we are not part of them. We are a different organization. We are actually a European non-for-profit association, and we are financed mainly by the European Commission and by AfCFTA. And basically, our main goal is precisely to ensure that the interest of SMEs are represented in European and as well in international standardization. We have currently 21 members. These are mainly associations that are representing SMEs, either at national or European level, horizontal associations representing SMEs in general, and also sector-specific associations. So basically, in our membership and in our activities, we are covering many areas, many sectors: lifts, ICT, construction, cosmetics. So many areas, since, as you know, SMEs are part, I would say, of most value chains in one way or another. So I would say that the main objective of our association are basically, first of all, raising awareness of SMEs about the importance of standardization, encouraging them to get involved in the standardization process. We are also, as a third objective, very much involved in standardization, trying to represent their interests to ensure that they have a strong voice, so that standards actually consider their needs as well. And to this respect, maybe I wanted to highlight that we are more and more involved as well in international standardization, and also making sure the interest of European SMEs are reflected in international standards. I think we heard from some of the speakers before how important it is if you want to get involved in international supply chains, that you comply with international standards and that the requirements of these international standards can be met by SMEs. And finally, we also help to SMEs in the uptake, or at least we try to help with the uptake of standards among SMEs. So if you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, I think it has been mentioned before. I won't go too much into details, but it has been highlighted already how standards are important. We all know that contrary to larger companies, SMEs have more limited financial resources and time as well, in order to show the conformity and performance of their products and gain the trust in the market as well. So standards can actually help them to reduce cost by, we know, streamlining internal company processes, help them to manage risk, increase quality of their products, etc. And also to ensure consistent quality, which is very important as well. Especially in Europe, standards have an important role in helping compliance with legal requirements. You might know that in Europe we have the system of harmonized standards, actually, that help companies by having a single standard that is applicable all over the European Union. And as a result, this helps to remove the need to comply with national testing or with national conformity requirements. So this actually also facilitates the access of SMEs to a larger market. And well, you know as well, it was mentioned before, so I won't repeat it, the importance, for example, to access new market, to facilitate integration with international value chains, etc. So I guess the key issue is, if standards are so good, if you know, if they can bring so many benefits for SMEs, why is the case that still we see that the uptake among of standards among SMEs is lower than in bigger companies, why they are less represented in standardization. Those are the issues that we in SBS would like to tackle. So I guess one of the main issues is the first one is that too often SMEs are unaware, or at least they are not sufficiently aware about the standards, the benefits they can bring, but also, and especially micro enterprises, I think it was mentioned before, they are normally occupied as well with the everyday business. That's what they need to focus on. They don't have 5 employees or let's say the luxury of having an employee dedicated to look at standards. So that's an important issue or challenge for SMEs. And even if they are aware of that standards exist and they might be important, it's difficult for them to identify which ones are actually important and essential for them. So I mentioned lack of resources, and of course, sometimes even if they identify the right standards, the content of the standards are too complicated, the requirements are too difficult for them to meet, and in addition, they have a lack of support to help them with the implementation of these standards. So if we go to the next slides, I will try to focus a bit more on what we are doing in SBS to try to address these standards, and I hope maybe this can give a bit of food for thought of maybe some things that could be done as well in Africa. So as I said, one of our main areas of action is raising awareness. So what we try to do here is in general to raise awareness in general of the importance of standards. And we do this normally through national seminars in the local language. And we do this together with the national standards bodies and national SME associations in order to raise awareness of SMEs of why they should be interested in standards and why they are important. We also offer a specific training and events on specific topics. We try to be very practical. SMEs need practical information. For example, this year we had an online seminar following the exit of the UK from the European Union on what are now, for example, the marking requirements. They cannot use anymore the CE marking to enter into, as they do in the European Union. What are the requirements now if they want to sell into the UK? We also, so a part of raising awareness for me is raising awareness of SMEs, but an important part, I think, as well, and that's something that we also do in SBS, is to raise awareness of the standard bodies and of policymakers of what are the challenges and the difficulties of SMEs, so that we can have a discussion and see how we can help them to focus more on SMEs and facilitate their access to standards, the implementation, etc. And it was mentioned in the presentations before, and actually I think in Europe this is very important. What we do in SBS in order to raise awareness, and I also think is key, is to use SME networks. We use the associations. We go to where SMEs are, and in Europe we have, let's say, a tradition of associations, and many SMEs, they get informed on developments, etc., through their association. So that's what we do. We try to use the existing SME networks in order to reach them. Regarding SME involvement, I mean, let's be honest, even if they are aware about the standards, and I have been working in standardization for many years, understanding how standards are developed is not easy. So we are trying through the seminars I mentioned before, but also by developing specific publications to try to explain in the easiest way we can how they can get involved in the process, how it works, and where are the key points where they, let's say, I would say the key points in the process where they could get involved or at least put forward comments. Another point which I think is important is to having local or national contact points. Sen and Senelec, for example, they have developed a website, and there any SMEs that is interested in knowing more has a specific contact point, a specific email, a specific person they can contact in every country in order to learn more about the standards, and is specifically dedicated to SMEs. So I think that's also important to give them a point, a local point that they can go to get more information and see how they can get involved, get the standards, etc. I mentioned before, resources is an issue for SMEs. And in many countries also in Europe, and this is something also we promote, they have specific conditions for SMEs to get involved. Before we heard about certification, that's also important, but also to be able to get involved, at least in Europe, to participate in the mirror committees at national level, very often you need to pay. So it's important also that this is not a barrier for SMEs to enter into the process, and that specific conditions for SMEs are there. Then funding for SME participation and standardization work is essential. I will explain later, but in SBS we are actually funding specific experts that represent SME interest and go to specific technical committees to make sure that the requirements and the standards meet SME needs. And a final point, which is important, is something we are working on. In Europe alone, we have 1,500 standards revised, developed every year. For an SME, it's impossible to be able to monitor, see what is relevant, etc. In SBS, we are doing part of this work, but we still miss efficient tools for SMEs to actually be able to monitor what standards exist, what standards are developing, and that are important for them. If you go to the next slide, please. Then regarding representation of SME interest, I already mentioned that within SBS we are paying, so funding specific experts that go to technical committees to represent SME interest at European, but also at international level. I think this is also a way to ensure that the standards that are developed meet SME needs, because this is also important. If we want SMEs to implement the standards, we also need to make sure that these standards fit their needs, are realistic, and can be implemented by SMEs. An important point, I think, as well, for the representation of SME interest is to ensure that there is a supporting framework, legal framework and policy framework in order to promote the participation of SMEs. In Europe, I would say we are very lucky. We have a European regulation, which is mentioned in the screen, which sets the framework of the European standardization system. And a key principle in this regulation is inclusiveness. So participation of, let's say, weaker stakeholders in the sense of consumers, SMEs, environmental interest is promoted, encouraged, and made effective as well through this framework. Then in SBS, we are also participating in the governing bodies of SEN and SENELEC, and also ETSI. So we participate in their technical boards, in policy groups, which actually ensures also that we can keep an eye on the policies developed by the European standards bodies, and we can put forward our comments in order to ensure that this framework respects SME and takes into account SME needs. We have also developed specific tools, which I think are important to ensure that the standards meet SME needs. So SBS was very active in the development of the SEN and SENELEC guide that afterwards was adopted by ISO and IC on SMEs to make sure that the standards take into account SME needs. And we also developed a test that can be used to ensure that the standards meet certain requirements that are important for SMEs. And finally, regarding the uptake of standards, I think it is important that we reduce prices of standards for SME. In Europe, at least standards, European standards developed by CEN and CENELEC, you need to pay, first of all, to get them. And as it was said before, afterwards, you might need to pay to get the certificate if you want to have a third-party conformity assessment. So it's important that this is accessible and that prices are accessible for SMEs as well. Apart from financial support, it's important to have step-by-step implementation and technical support as well for SMEs in order to implement many of these standards. Within SBS, we have also developed guides in order to support some the implementation of some standards to make it easier for SMEs. So this is something we also do, and you have some examples in the slide. And if I can go just to the final slide, is just actually 3 key elements or 3 key, let's say, messages, elements that I wanted to highlight. First of all, the need to ensure that we use SME networks to reach SMEs, at least in Europe. I'm not so knowledgeable about Africa, but there is a tradition of SMEs being involved in associations, and it's important we use these networks. The second message is that standards will be used by SMEs. And if we want to increase the uptake of standards, this is very important. So we need to ensure that standards meet as well SME needs, and they have requirements that can be met by SMEs. And the final point, which I think is as well essential, is the need for financial and practical support in order to encourage participation and also the implementation of standards. And that was all from my side. So I'm happy to contribute to the discussion and answer any questions there might be.
Thank you very much, Maitani. Actually, very interesting that even when you look at the chart, the issue of finance is there for SMEs. And the helping SMEs step by step in implementation. And actually, you even talked about developing tools in the local language. That the SME can understand the standard, which is normally a scientific document. The other also important part that you mentioned, SMEs might not know actually relevant standard as even at the European Union, where more than 1,000 standards are developed each year. We have also other international standards. We have even industrial standards from the private sector, meaning there are so many standards to implement. My question, you have worked with these SMEs. What are they doing also wrong? Yeah, what on their side? Let's now put the SM on spot. Yeah, what should they do? Not just probably what a standard body or government should do.
Yeah, you are putting me in an uncomfortable position because you are obliging me to think the other way that I normally think. So that's actually quite a difficult exercise for me. But, you know, I have also been on the other side. So I have been working for 11 years also in the standards organization. And if I put myself in that perspective, I think sometimes when I was also working there, I also found that there is a lot of misconception as well from the side of SMEs as well on what a standard is, how they are developed, etc., etc. So I think from the side of SMEs, I think they should come also with a bit of more of an open mind, in the sense that sometimes they just think of standards as the, let's say, the evil they need to follow. They should have a bit of more of an open mind and also realize that there are a lot of benefits actually in using standards. We saw them. So it's not just something that you need to follow because the bigger company in the supply chain is asking you to follow, but actually there are also a lot of things to win if you follow standards. Increasing increasing your competitiveness can help you to promote more innovative goods, can help you in a lot of ways. So I would say that maybe from the SME side, they should, at least from the European side, sometimes come to discuss about standards without these preconceptions and more with an open mind, and then they will realize that indeed there are many advantages as well in using standards. I mean, there are many challenges, but the truth is there are many advantages, and yeah, it can bring a real benefit to a company.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm sorry I put you on the other side.
It's okay.
You are thinking, but yeah, it's really important what you said, that the positive mind approach. Yeah, not just saying it's costly, it's not feasible, but also have that the standards have a benefit to the SME. Thank you very much, Maitane, for your good presentation. Our last speaker today is Mr. Ruben Gisore, who is the African Organization for Standard Technical Director, in charge of coordinating technical programs that include standards harmonization and conformity assessment harmonization. Ruben Gisore has experience working on quality infrastructure in the East Africa community, in COMESA, actually now at the continental level. Ruben Gisore has been in ARZO since 2012 and is going to give us a talk on SME competitiveness in the global value chain and African single market under the AfCFTA agreement. The case of ARZO's step-by-step maturity, certification, and qualification model. Ruben Gisore, you can share your presentation.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, and thank you all for those who have presented before me. Actually, they have made my work much easier so that I can concentrate on those aspects which maybe they have not yet captured. Now, from the onset, I would say that Africa is unique in the sense that this is the only continent where you find perhaps that aspects of SMEs are still not taken very seriously. And I think the last question you asked was also one question that I would have been very uncomfortable to answer. But take it from the point of view that at some point when we started the aspect of saying we would like to do standards that are sensitive to the SMEs, the question we were being asked is, do you want them to produce inferior goods? We said, no, we are not saying we want them to produce inferior goods, but produce standards that are easy for them to understand and comply. And in that respect, it became a bit contentious. And I think at some point, we had to step back and say, okay, we don't want people to misunderstand what we are doing, but rather we would like to take it up when the situation has improved. However, I think, as you've seen even from Sandra's presentation, is that the situation has not really improved. It has taken a lot of lobbying. Sometimes it has taken external interventions to make sure that people understand that understanding a standard is not everybody's, daily kind of cup of tea. And in that respect, it is important that the standards are made in a way that people can understand. And in that respect, I think I would answer some of the few questions that what we have done in ARZO, which we couldn't achieve at a very early age when I was in one of the standards bodies, is that we have started the process of making simplified outreach materials that take a standard, break it down to a very simplified language, illustrate it where it is necessary and it is possible, and then we give it out and encourage the member states that they can actually distribute these standards freely. The materials are distributed freely to the stakeholders who are in the value chains, and therefore it is easier to understand. And now that concept has started catching up, and we see a very good and positive aspect in terms of the projects that are being initiated in some countries where they have not only just taken those standards and given out to the people who need them, but also they have translated them to some local languages that are easier to understand. Now, having said that, it is also important to note that some of the strongest economies actually have specific units which deal with the standards that address issues of SMEs. Now, you take, for example, that what you've seen from Europe, the small business standards. In the USA, I'm aware they have the Small Business Administration, which also looks into all these things. Now, can the African continent do the same? Yeah, if it does that, it will stand out to benefit much more. So let me just go to what they have not defined, because some of the data are the same. So what is an SME in the African context? It is a very interesting kind of slide I got from a very early presentation. So in Africa, mostly SMEs are just mythologies. It's like you're looking at it as somebody who is simply struggling. They are enjoying themselves. Sometimes, they are just like poets giving you, some entertainment. When what we need is to look at these people as key drivers of the economy, what the person here was calling homo economicus. So, and then you look at it as a national standards body. What are we doing? We know there's a lot of bureaucracies in government, and sometimes these bureaucracies are really stifling. What are the national standards bodies doing? And this is the kind of engagement you're trying to have with our members as national standards bodies. When we look across the value chains, we know that if the SMEs comply with the standards, they are able to participate in supplying certain key value chain elements which are needed by big companies. And therefore, they are able to actually participate in growing our economies. Now, we started a project that has not really taken off at the ARSO level. And this is the SME program, where the objectives are to identify sector-specific products and related standards with high clustering and specialization effect. So this is one of the things that we were looking at, and it's important to note that it has been mentioned. Now, then impart the benefits of implementing standards by SMEs to participate in standardization activities. And this is one of the aspects that we have always communicated with our member states, that when we are participating in standards, when we are doing end training, let's get these people on board. Then piloting or promotion of high impact compliant products, particularly those that come from the SMEs, facilitate the IP intellectual property registration for local SME innovations, assist SMEs in clusters to integrate into global trade, particularly now that we have opened up the African Continental Free Trade Area. You can look at how do they participate in. There's this misleading concept that people get that when you mention African Free Trade Area, that is a free trade area. In the local market, in the village market, you actually pick your products and go to the market. Nobody inspects. So people assume that is the same thing that is going to happen, that you can pick your things from Zambia and take them to Zimbabwe without any compliance to standards. That's not going to happen. So they need to understand that standards are the key to ensuring that that free movement can happen, that free trade can happen. And therefore we need those standards. We need the intellectual property rights registration, and we need to train people on how this is done. Now, this is something that we are doing under another program that is the Made in Africa initiative. And therefore, we are looking forward to ensuring that some of these elements get there into the whole system. So I will go to the model that we are discussing about so that you get to understand the key thing. Now, this is a model that is comparable to what we have in the Indian system. They call it Z, or the zero defect, zero effect, ensuring that the products as much as possible, they are of very high quality. We know you cannot achieve that 100% the first time, but it is important that you aim to get the right quality from the beginning. Not that it is just possible, but something that can go into it. Then we need to look at zero effect in actual fact, meaning there's no wastage or there's minimum wastage, and it doesn't impact on the environment. It doesn't impact on the health and safety of the people that are going to use it. So the zero defect theory aims to make a project, the project waste-free. That's a product that is waste-free, and the process is achieved stepwise. It's not achieved once. You have to do it stepwise. So what I've demonstrated here is what the Indian system uses, but which we have adapted in our own way so that it improves in time. So the process and product standards have tiers that we have developed. You'd see that the compliance, the product compliance is achieved by meeting the minimum requirements, which are not negotiable in any particular instance. So if it's a good, it's a consumable product, it must be safe. That is not negotiable. It must be registered. It must have that minimum standardization mark that you find in many countries. If it is a safety mark, it must have that. Then we look at level 2, where you're having, there's an organization understanding that I need to get certification. So the first level people are basically getting to understand that there's a system in place. And this is what you need from the beginning that was mentioned by one of the presenters, that we need to start from the beginning, that understanding the use of these standards. And then you move to certification. The second level that is now understanding, seeking the certification, and this allows you to do business, basically at the local level and the national level. So you're able to move the products within the country. And then looking at the third level, which we call the silver level, in accordance with our standards, where the organization is now well organized and they're able to actually access national as well as regional markets. So you keep improving. And then you look at the gold level that you are an achiever now, you're able to actually supply your products, they can meet the international value chains, and they are able to integrate into the global business environment. But we have the highest level now that you are excellent and your products are recognized at the world level. That's the world-class competitiveness. Now, how many years do you take? The second level, the first level you can take as long as possible, but you are encouraged to actually enter into the certification brackets. Level 2 is renewed every year. You have entered into that, but the total is 3 years. Otherwise, you revert back to level 1. Then when you're in level 3, level 4, and 5, you can decide to remain at any of those levels for as long as possible. But the assessment is renewed every 3 years. Now, the attainment of these levels is not rigid, it's not sequential. There are those firms which are very well organized, and they have been able to actually apply from the first instance for the highest levels. Now, how is that? It's because you've taken all the necessary arrangements, you put into into the system investments that are necessary, you put the staff that you have trained, you put in place mechanisms for assessing the products, and they meet the requirements of the market. And therefore, they are able to actually get to the highest levels possible. So this is the system, is stepwise, and it's possible that you can apply from the very beginning and get it. So one of the standards that you look at as an example is the one that deals with sustainable agriculture. And you will see that there are those minimum requirements which we say pre-required that you must meet at all levels. Now, when you are starting to move from bronze, you can see at the bronze level, you have the critical requirements, they are 19. As you move across, you see the increasing to 32. And in total, the standard has the 232 requirements, but you meet them sequentially at every level as you improve the system. And with that, I end by saying that it is possible that we can have our businesses meet the standards. It is also possible that even if it is SMEs, they can be assisted to do this. And the understanding should be there that when the SMEs do well, they actually contribute to the economy and therefore create employment and incomes and livelihoods. And for that, we really need an investment into it, which we are not seeing in Africa, but it's very important that it's done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ruben. You presented well the maturity model. Why do you think the SMEs should go for this maturity model certification process?
Thank you very much. Actually, the key thing that is attractive for this maturity model is that they start from the very beginning with the understanding and organization. So the first few, the first involvement is not really to get certification, but to get organized, to be recognized, and therefore to enter the system in a very affordable way. So that provides a pathway that is very affordable, and then learning as you move along, and therefore improving in time in a very flexible way so that you enter into the global supply chain systems.
Thank you very much. Do you, before you go, Ruben, probably I start from you, looking at different questions that our participants have been asking. The issue of finance, the issue of supporting SME. What is your view on this issue, and what is your one recommendation takeaway message for this webinar?
I think from the various presentations that we've had today, you realize that finance is a very big issue. SMEs do not have the outlay that is necessary to invest in all the necessary conformity assessment systems, participate in the standards, purchase the standards, get them translated. Because if you look at the kind of standards that we are offering in many of the African countries, they will need a consultant to do the translation and make it easier for people to understand. So what is required, I think, and it's very critical for most of our member states to understand, is that training and facilitating the SMEs to access the standards, to access conformity assessment is an investment in their own economies. This is how you can create jobs. And this is how you get your economy to be improving and playing at the international or regional level. So countries need to learn from the best examples. If you look at the European Union establishing such units, you are looking at the USA establishing such units, and they are powerful countries. Why is it that we are not doing the same, facilitating our SMEs, investing in their capacity building to actually participate in the trade at the national level as well as regional and international level? So investment in capacity building for SMEs to comply with standards and get certification is very key for our member states to follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Investing in SME actually is on itself an investment for our government, for our Bureau of Standards. Thank you very much, Ruben. My turn. There was a question from the participant that did the EU try to give standard for free to the SMEs? The European Union did ever try to give a meaning, I can say, Senelec, did they ever try to give the standard for free to the SMEs?
No, but I mean, in Europe, we have three standards organizations, SEN, Senelec, and ETSI. And they have different models. The standards of ETSI, which deals with telecommunications and ICT, are available for free in the internet. So you can go to their website and you can have them for free. The SEN and Senelec ones No, but that is because they have different business models. As well, I guess, in the case of ARSO, you also need to pay your employees. You also need to get money to actually have the standards being developed. So how they get this money is done in different ways. And in the case of Senelec and the national standards bodies that are members of them, a big part of how they get the revenues to run the system is also through the sale of standards. But as I said, ETSI has a different business model, and the standards are available for free. So, I'm just speaking now personally. My view is I don't like to get into these discussions of standards are for free, yes, no. I think if if they are the important thing is they are accessible. It's not so much whether you have to pay, if it's a reasonable fee, whether you have to pay for them, is what you are going to get out of them as well. So if they are good standards, if they are standards that can help SMEs, and, as I say, many national standards bodies also have preferential conditions. I also know European associations that have deals with the standards bodies to get, for example, for the members, the standards in a more, easier way, etc. So I wouldn't focus so much on that. On the price of standards, I think, there are different business models. It's true also that you need to get the money somewhere for the standards organizations to work, but there are other ways in which we can make sure that the standards are accessible for SMEs. So I think we need to focus on that, even if there is a price, that is a reasonable price and is not a barrier for SMEs to access them.
Yeah, accessibility. And what would be your one recommendation for this webinar?
Well, I would have many. So if I have to
choose one, which is very important. Yeah.
I think for me, what is essential is that if we also want SMEs to implement standards, we also need to start by making standards with SMEs in mind. That would be for me the main recommendation. So we need to ensure that SMEs in one way or another, either through associations, that's a lot of times what happens in Europe, are around the table in national, regional, and international standards. I think that's key.
Thank you very much. You remind me that we are now talking about the gender mainstreaming in standardization. Maybe we can call it SMEs mainstreaming in standardization.
As well.
Thank you very much. Sandra, someone asked if there is any plan for the COMESA Business Council to support SMEs for implementation of standards. Is there any current plan to support SMEs?
Yes, we are working with the various development partners to see if we can put in a pool of support that's going to focus on technical skills, capacity building for business operations, for enterprises. And we are also focusing on seeing how to work with the bureaus of standards to drive such a project with the bureaus of standards and the business associations, which was rightly mentioned earlier in one of the presentations, to support the implementation of these projects in some of the countries. It will still be a continuation of the local sourcing for partnerships program, specifically focusing on training, business counseling for enterprises to understand standards and understand how they can comply to them. Working closely to reduce the costs of certification for these SMEs and linking them to markets, linking them to markets where they can meet the purchasing requirements of the buyers. So it's an ongoing initiative, and I can take this opportunity to welcome support from any partnerships that are here to continuously boost this project, as it is in high demand from a lot of the countries in the region. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Sandra. And what would be your one recommendation to this webinar? Takeaway message.
Yes, I will still come back to two aspects. I'll not say one, but two. One, the first one is it's important for the bureaus of standards to look at how the industries in their markets are growing and to see how they can actually start the process of standardization in the business operations of the companies, from the very beginning. Secondly, I still encourage a lot of the national standards bodies and the relevant regulatory authorities to look at tailored models that can reduce the cost of certification for SMEs, especially right now when we're trying to exploit the opportunities of the CFTA. We were looking to boost our markets, to grow into our regional markets and also enjoy the fruits of that. So it's important that this is prioritized by the bureaus of standards and the regulatory authorities going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Ebe, you are much aware of that actually on the 3rd September, the ministers in charge of economics, trade, industry, and mining at the African Union adopted the Africa Quality Policy. You are also aware that the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, TPT Annex 6, recommend standards from ARSO and AfCFTA. What do you think you should do in the future? Because in your project, you are looking at mango, you are looking at cassava value chain, you are looking at cosmetics. If we need to support the intra-Africa trade, starting from such a project, why not start using the continental standard instead of using the regional standard or country-based standards?
Yeah, no, definitely. This is something that is on the pipeline. And when we talk about standards, it's both the national, the regional, and the international standards. And definitely integrating the regional standards into our projects is something that we do for the standards that are already available, and that we support also for the development of the new regional standards. So it's within our mandate, and it's within our scope of intervention, and it will be even more important now with the strengthening of the African Commercial Free Trade Agreement. And just if you allow me to quickly comment on what Sandra and Maitan were saying before me, I also believe, and I saw some comments in the chat, I mean, it's not really the cost of the standard for the companies. It's more the understanding of what the companies get out of the standard that makes this investment in buying the standard very low. I mean, the investment is, the financial investment is very low compared to what they would gain out of it. The cost gets higher for the certification and for the translation of what the standard means when you apply it to an SME. That coaching, that support, that training is what costs, not the cost of the standard per se. And for this, I would go back to what we were saying at the very beginning. It's important that SMEs don't work alone. Maitan was saying it also. I mean, go through your associations. If there is no association, there are peer SMEs that are working just next door from you, that are doing exactly the same product as you, and then lobby for getting access to collective training. And this is exactly what we do in the cluster approach. You have one translator of the standard for several SMEs, and then you immediately have an impact, a snowball effect, and you have an impact on the ground that make also this coaching and support an investment that is low when you consider what one SME has to pay, but that has a tremendous impact on the ground in terms of knowledge, in terms of competitiveness, and in terms of understanding why standards are important. So I would say, again, yeah, don't work in isolation.
Thank you. And what would be your one key recommendation?
Yeah, I think this would be the one. This would be really the one. And then by working together through sectorial associations, through networks, through clusters, SMEs have also the opportunity to have a stronger voice with the standard development bodies in the countries and at the regional level, because they can really have a leverage effect on the standards that are developed and on how the SMEs can be better trained. So don't work in isolation would be the buzzword.
Thank you very much, Ebe. When I look at the key recommendation, actually I have noted 7 key recommendations. The first one being investing in capacity building, in training, and facilitate SMEs to access the standard, to access other tools. That would be the first one. Second, assessing relevant standards for SMEs. Third, making standard with SMEs, what we call SMEs mainstreaming in standardization work. Fourth, support industry process from the beginning, showcasing the benefit of standard. Fifth, having a business model that can reduce the cost of certification, mainly by clustering the SMEs. Six, work on specific value chains to showcase the benefit of standard. And lastly, the development of different tools for outreach materials that can be understood by the SMEs. Those are the key recommendations I noted down. I would like, first of all, to thank our speakers. Ebe, thank you for being with us. We will actually continue talking on the sideline and be involved very much in different projects. Arzo is working very well with UNIDO on different issues. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maitana, for your contribution. We look forward actually to engage with you and see how we can implement the recommendation you had in your presentation, and working together, I believe that we can increase EU-Africa trade. Thank you, Sandra, for being with us and giving the views of the private sector. We continue to work with you as the Commercial Business Council, and actually you are in also part of our advisory board on sustainable and Ecomark Africa. And Arzo is also working with you on many projects and what you mentioned on local sourcing. And thank you, Ruben Gisore, for giving the perspective of the African Organization for Standardization, for the maturity model, how the SMEs can apply the maturity model and improve on the quality and their competitiveness. Thank you, participants. You have been with us for the last almost 2 hours. We thank you for every month linking with Arzo on different webinars that we conduct every month. Our next webinar actually, which is next week, is on the public forum. We will be working with WTO on quality infrastructure for post-COVID-19 resilience in Africa, where we will be having different views from different experts that you can see. We are looking forward to share with you the link probably tomorrow we'll get the link, as we are working on the link for the WTO. In October, we will also have another webinar on the gender issues in standardization, the gender dimension of standards and mainstreaming gender in the development and implementation of standards. That actually was a preview where we had 3 speakers who can tell us about the issues related to the gender. And we have you, Sandra, we have Maitane, we have Ebe. We might call upon you once again now on the gender side in next month. Thank you very much, and looking forward to seeing you in the next webinars. Thank you, and goodbye. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Bye.
Bye-bye.